armor, rations, tools, all made for conventional combat. In contrast, the Picts moved lightly, carried little, attacked quickly, retreated before the response arrived, and disappeared back into the landscape. Tacitus describes this pattern. In northern Britain, however, there was an exception. A mountainous territory shrouded in mist, where the forests seemed to watch in silence and the winds cut like blades. Caledonia, what we now know as Scotland. But what was there that managed to stop the greatest empire of antiquity? Today you will learn about the land that Rome never managed to conquer. From its beginnings, Rome never saw war solely as a defensive necessity. For the Romans, waging war was a legitimate way to assert power, project prestige, and expand civilization. Conquering meant more than dominating lands. It meant imposing order on a world seen as chaotic. That is why each new province was celebrated as a moral victory, as if the universe itself were surrendering to Roman reason. During the Republic, this logic was already in place, but it was during the Empire that it intensified as a doctrine. Under Caesar, Gaul was crushed. Under Octavian, Egypt was absorbed and Hispania consolidated. In Asia, even the Parthians, one of Rome's greatest historical enemies, were contained within well-defined borders. And in the West, what seemed to be the edge of the known world, the island of Britannia, was also swallowed up by the imperial machine. In the year 43 AD, Emperor Claudius launched an ambitious campaign in Britain with the support of local elites, the skillful use of diplomacy, and an overwhelming military force. The Romans took the south of the island with surprising speed. Entire tribes were co-opted. Local leaders were granted citizenship and official positions. Within a few decades, southern Britain already boasted amphitheaters, paved roads, and even public baths. For the Romans, it seemed like another inevitable success. And then their eyes turned northward. Caledonia was seen as just another stage, just a mountainous terrain to overcome. A technical obstacle, not a strategic one. The peoples who lived there were considered primitive, tribal, without writing, without large-scale agriculture, without a central political organization. Rome saw them as savages who had not yet understood the benefits of being conquered. Calo Julius Agricola, governor of Britain and father-in-law of the historian Tacitus, was one of the first to lead campaigns to the north. In his biography written by Tacitus, we clearly see the Roman mentality. The Caledonians were described as tough brutes, yes, but backward and therefore inevitably surmountable. Rome believed that time and force would be enough to bring them to their senses. But that confidence hid a fatal blindness, because Rome knew how to deal with enemy armies. It knew how to negotiate with local elites. It knew how to subdue cities and cut off supplies. But it did not know what to do when the enemy had no king, no capital, and wanted absolutely nothing from Rome. The moment the legions crossed the threshold of Caledonia, everything began to go wrong. Caledonia was made of rocks and silence, a landscape shaped to slowly destroy any force that dared to cross it. The mountains of the Great Plains rose like natural walls, cut by narrow valleys, treacherous swamps, and forests so dense that light barely touched the ground. The Great Caledonian Forest, a mass of ancient vegetation, was impenetrable, dark, and full of invisible traps. The peat bogs swallowed feet, horses, and even entire carts. Deep lakes. The locks emerged like black wounds in the landscape, and the ground, always damp, slippery, unstable. The rain seemed endless. Thick fogs arose out of nowhere, blocking visibility to within a few meters. The legionnaires marched without knowing if the road ahead was safe or would lead them straight to a precipice. Even in the camps, the humidity was relentless. Rotting provisions, corroding armor, spreading disease. Medical accounts from the time mention the increase in dysentery, lung infections, and mysterious fevers among the troops in northern Britannia. Diseases that did not kill in combat, but slowly wore down the morale of any army. Roman strategy, developed over centuries, depended on order. Calculated marches, symmetrical camps, well-planned roads, constant supply lines. It was a machine, but machines break down when the terrain refuses to cooperate. In Caledonia, no road remained intact for long. No convoy could advance without risk, no map was reliable, and every tree, every hill, every bend could hide the next disaster. Visibility was so unstable that scouts got lost. Entire patrols disappeared. Archaeological research and climatological studies confirm that the climate in Scotland during the Roman period was in many ways even harsher than it is today. Long winters, short summers, and constant humidity turned the campaign into a war against the environment itself. The Romans were prepared to face human armies, but in Caledonia, their greatest enemy was the ground beneath their feet, followed by the ghosts that slipped through the fog and used nature as their own weapon. They appeared as shadows on the hills, painted bodies, faces hidden by the mist, eyes as alert as those of predators. The Romans called them Picti, the painted ones, not because they knew their language or culture, but because they saw their skin marked with blue lines, mystical drawings, tribal symbols, probably made with wad, a local plant with intense coloring. It was the only possible visual record of a people who left no writings and built no cities. The Picts were not a unified nation, but rather dozens of tribes and clans scattered among mountains, valleys, and forests, each with its own leader, culture, and way of surviving in one of the most hostile environments in Europe. The absence of a central government, which the Romans saw as a sign of weakness, was in fact a weapon because there was no single point to conquer. Each tribe was a head of the same snake. Cutting off one did not prevent the others from continuing to bite. They lived in circular stone structures called brocks, in isolated villages, almost always built in elevated places, difficult to access, with a strategic view of the surroundings. They knew where to tread, where to escape, where to ambush. They navigated between rivers and lakes in light, silent boats, using paths invisible to Roman eyes. And when pursued, they disappeared among the trees as if they were part of them. The most impressive thing is that they resisted not only with spears and tactics, they resisted with an idea that they did not need Rome. They did not want citizenship. They did not want roads. They did not want to dress like Romans or speak like them. They rejected the imperial model from within, and that disarmed one of Rome's greatest weapons, its ability to absorb. Throughout its history, Rome transformed enemies into allies, co-opted elites, promoted the children of barbarian kings, offered positions, status, citizenship. It helped create Romans outside Rome, but the Picts did not want that gift. They did not seek advancement or recognition. They were at home. And anyone who crossed those hills armed would be treated as an invader and eliminated. Tacitus, in describing the Caledonians, the direct ancestors of the Picts, highlights a phrase that sums up the spirit of those tribes. They are more prepared for war than for submission. It was not just a matter of pride, it was a system of survival. The more Rome attacked, the more the Pictish tribes scattered. The more Rome built, the more they demolished. It was a resistance that could not be suppressed with conventional victories because it did not come from castles or senates, but from the land, the forest, and the refusal to kneel. And it was exactly that way of thinking that gave rise to a completely different way of fighting. Rome's greatest strength always lay in predictability, organized formations, clear orders, constant advance. The legions were like mobile walls designed to crush the enemy with discipline and weight, and that worked when the enemy appeared, but the Picts did not appear. Not in open country, not at the appointed time, not on Rome's terms. The war that the Picts imposed was not fought with great battles, but with silence, ambushes in dense forests, nighttime attacks on sleeping camps, patrols that disappeared without a trace. It was a war that began when the Romans believed the path was clear and ended with arrows flying out of the fog, spears emerging from the undergrowth, stones rolling down the slopes. The Romans were not prepared for that. Each soldier marched with dozens of pounds of equipment, shield, gladius, armor, rations, tools, all made for conventional combat. In contrast, the Picts moved lightly, carried little, attacked quickly, retreated before the response arrived, and disappeared back into the landscape. Tacitus describes this pattern when narrating the famous Battle of Mount Gropius. According to him, the Caledonians appeared like ghosts in the hills, fought fiercely, and then disappeared. Even with the Roman victory in that confrontation, with Agricola claiming to have killed thousands of enemies, the actual result was insignificant. There was no occupation or control because there was no central structure to control. The survivors simply withdrew, demobilized, and reappeared weeks later at another location. It was like fighting smoke.